Imagine the ring of your phone at 3 a.m. It's law enforcement. They say your grown child is in custody, accused of destroying the very family you once watched him cradle in his arms. In the split second it takes to inhale, the life you knew fractures. For the rest of the world, the story becomes instant headline fodder. A suspect, a villain, a name to attach to outrage. But for you, he is still the boy you coaxed through nightmares, the teenager you hugged after his first heartbreak, the man you toasted at his wedding. This is a collision point between unconditional parental love and an unforgiving public. When Chris Watts was accused and convicted of killing Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and the unborn Nico, his parents face a nightmare with no script. Do you defend? Do you condemn? Is silence betrayal, or is loyalty immoral? You're watching Dark Truth, true crime stories. Before we dive into the full story, subscribe so you don't miss our deep dives into shocking true crime cases and the human psychology behind them. Our journey in this documentary is not about relitigating guilt that's settled. It is about understanding why parents, even faced with horrific evidence, sometimes cling to hope, mount defenses, or search for reasons the rest of us cannot stomach. Tonight, we peel back 30 layers of that paradox. We'll see denial, guilt, stigma, and a love that refuses to die. We'll ask uncomfortable questions. Is it blindness or is it survival? Are we judging them for the very humanity we claim to value? The science of parental defense mechanisms. When psychologists dissect families rocked by violent crime, patterns rise like tide marks on a cliff. There's no tidy flowchart for grief. There is, however, an ancient reflex built into the human brain. Protect the bond with your offspring at all costs. Parents carry a mental blueprint of their child etched across decades, updated with every scraped knee and bedtime story. That blueprint resists sudden revision. When reality demands, erase this son, redraw a killer, the mind balks. Defense mechanisms are the scaffolding the psyche erects to prevent collapse. Denial shields from the full blast of horror. Rationalization wraps carnage in maybe there's a reason. Minimization trims the edges of atrocity to manageable size. These aren't moral choices so much as neurological stopgaps. For Cindy and Ronnie Watts, every cell of that protective wiring fired at once. To surrender to the idea that Chris had butchered his daughters was to destroy the narrative of parenthood they had inhabited for 33 years. Better, in that first moment, to grasp at explanations anything than to let the mind free fall. Science demystifies the reflex. Understanding that mechanism doesn't excuse public statements that wound victims' families, but reframes them. This is not a press strategy. It is a human brain gasping for air. Denial as the first reaction. Denial is not ignorance. It is a psychic tourniquet. Imagine emotional blood loss so catastrophic that without a temporary constriction, the entire system fails. In the early days after Chris's arrest, friends recall Cindy's disbelief. Chris adored those girls. He would never. To outsiders, that sounds naive. Inside her chest, it was the only way to keep her heart beating. Memory is complicit. It unspools home movie reels. Chris at 5, giggling in a Superman cape. Chris at 12, sweaty palms gripping the wheel during his first driving lesson. Chris beaming the day Bella was born. Each recollection shouts, this is who he is. When media reports scream, he is a killer, the inner archive retorts, not the boy I raised. For parents, denial buys time to breathe, to marshal emotional resources. That delay can last hours or years, depending on personality, culture, and evidence. Listeners should resist quick judgment. Denial is less a choice than a reflex. Think of it as shock's cousin numbing pain long enough to survive. Rationalizing the impossible, there must be a reason. As denial thaws, the mind scrambles for meaning. Total chaos, my son slaughtered innocence for nothing, is psychologically unsustainable. The next step is rationalization. Here's the pattern. Build a story that makes the unbearable slightly less senseless. Maybe stress broke him. Maybe marital conflict spiraled. Perhaps there was a confrontation gone wrong. These scaffolds are flimsy, but they steady shaking knees. For the Watts parents, this often meant probing alternative narratives. Could Shanann have provoked a tragedy? Did someone else play a role? Was there mental illness we missed? To the public, such speculation can feel like blame shifting. To a parent, it is oxygen. Rationalization has roots in our evolutionary wiring. A world governed by cause and effect is safer than one ruled by random cruelty. Assigning reason, no matter how implausible, restores a thread of order. This stage can persist for months, interwoven with grief. Importantly, rationalization does not always equal absolution. Some parents accept their child's guilt yet still construct if-only narratives, because a random act of evil is a chasm too wide to stare into every day. Childhood nostalgia holding on to innocence. Every parent stores a private museum of memories. Photographs curl to the edges. The smell of grass at a first Little League game. The sparkle of Christmas mornings. For Cindy and Ronnie Watts, those images were impossible to silence. They remembered Chris running across the backyard with a crooked grin, falling asleep on his mother's shoulder after a long day. Those moments become protective film, softening the glare of headlines calling him a murderer. Clinging to childhood nostalgia is not about rewriting history. It is about preserving fragments of a relationship that felt pure and safe. Psychologists often describe this as selective recall. In the face of horror, the mind reaches for evidence that contradicts it. A parent whispers, "I knew him before the world did. I know there is still good inside." These recollections can seem tone-deaf to outsiders. Yet for parents, they are lifelines, reminders that love existed long before crime. The boy in those memories is real, even if the man who committed the murders is also real. That duality creates unbearable tension, and nostalgia is a thread that keeps him connected to a past untainted by violence. The psychological anchor of parental love. Parental love is not a contract that dissolves with wrongdoing. It is a primal bond, forged before language, that resists extinction even when confronted with betrayal. Scientists studying attachment describe it as a biological imperative. To a parent, the child is still theirs, regardless of what the court docket says. For the Watts, love became an anchor preventing total emotional drift. When every headline screamed monster, their hearts whispered son. That whisper may be irrational, but it is powerful. Without it, they risk being swept into an ocean of grief too vast to survive. Viewers sometimes demand clean lines. They want parents to declare, "I disown him." In reality, many cannot. Love does not cancel justice, but neither does justice cancel love. The anchor holds even as the storm rages, because letting go would feel like a second death. Understanding that truth helps explain why words of defense escape even the lips of those mourning the victims. Public backlash against the Watts parents' defense. Once Cindy suggested Shanann was controlling, outrage erupted online. Comment sections filled with fury. Victim advocates denounce her as cruel. To the world, defending Chris felt like spitting on graves. For Cindy, it was self-protection, not malice. Yet perception became reality. News segments replayed her quote stripped of context, branding her as the mother who blamed the victim. The internet amplifies judgment with no cooling period. Hate mail arrives before parents finish grieving. Friends pull away, fearing association. The Watts face a digital jury that demanded either condemnation or silence. Any nuance looked like betrayal. This backlash compounds trauma. Parents are left navigating two fronts. Internally, they wrestle with guilt and sorrow. Externally, they fight a storm of strangers' anger. Some retreat entirely. Others double down on defense as an act of defiance. Either way, public scrutiny magnifies every misstep, turning raw coping mechanisms into headlines. separating Chris the son versus Chris the murderer. To survive, many parents create a psychological split. They divide their child into two selves. One is a beloved son who sent Mother's Day cards and fixed the porch steps. The other is the man who committed unforgivable acts. By holding these identities apart, the parent can condemn the crime while still loving the person they once knew. Ronnie and Cindy's interviews reveal hints of this separation. They speak of the Chris who played with Bella and Cece as if he still exists somewhere beneath the prison uniform. This compartmentalization is a coping skill, not a legal argument. Without it, the entire relationship collapses into horror. Critics often mistake this split as excuse-making. In truth, it is a fragile compromise. It allows parents to maintain dignity in visiting rooms, to write letters, to keep breathing. It does not erase guilt, but it softens the crushing weight of finality. This mental boundary is common in families facing unimaginable betrayal, and is one reason their words sometimes seem contradictory to outsiders. Trauma bonds within families. A trauma bond is the invisible rope that ties people together after they endure the same catastrophe. When a child commits a violent crime, the parents are swept into the fallout. They are interrogated, questioned, whispered about. Overnight, they move from ordinary life to the glare of cameras and headlines. That shock fuses a family in an unusual way. For Cindy and Ronnie Watts, the arrest was not only the loss of grandchildren and daughter-in-law, it was a rupture of their entire identity as parents. They entered the same hurricane as Chris. He sat in a cell, they sat at home reading death threats, yet the storm swallowed them all. Trauma binds because shared pain seeks companionship. They were united by devastation, even as they struggled to comprehend what he had done. Researchers note that trauma bonds can distort perspective. Parents begin to feel they must protect the child because no one else will. A us-against-the-world mentality develops. This explains why some parents continue visiting, writing letters, clinging to any fragment of family that survives. In their minds, abandonment would deepen the wound. The bond becomes the only familiar thing left in a life shredded by crime. Parental guilt. Did they feel responsible? The first private question many parents ask after a child's crime is whispered, not spoken. Did I fail? Did I miss the signs? Guilt seeps in before the first press conference. Every bedtime story and every family dinner replays, searching for the moment everything went wrong. For the Watts, Chris had been described as a quiet, compliant boy. Teachers praised him. Neighbors trusted him. So when reality collapsed, guilt rushed in to fill the vacuum. Cindy hinted in interviews that she could not reconcile the man in custody with the boy she raised. Underneath that disbelief sits an aching suspicion. If he did this, where did we go wrong? Parental guilt can be corrosive. It magnifies memories of ordinary mistakes until they feel like omens ignored. Psychology calls this counterfactual thinking, an endless loop of what-ifs. What if we had noticed depression? What if we had intervened in the marriage? What if we had done more? The mind constructs these stories as a desperate bid for control, because accepting the crime as pure chaos is unbearable. Guilt feels terrible, but at least implies agency, and agency offers a thin comfort. Defending as a way to protect themselves too. When parents defend a killer child, the public assumes they are shielding the offender. Often they are shielding themselves. To accept that a son is wholly monstrous is to accept that the family tree produced evil. That realization can crush a lifetime of identity. By portraying Chris as pressured, misled, or momentarily broken, the Watts soften reflection they see in the mirror. It allows them to believe their love, their lessons, their home were not entirely futile. Defending becomes self-preservation. Without it, shame can metastasize into despair. This instinct does not absolve harm, but it explains persistence. A statement like "he is still my boy" is less about arguing innocence and more about refusing to erase decades of parenthood. In interviews, You can hear the tremor behind their words, as though they are speaking as much to themselves as to the audience. It is an attempt to stay whole in a story built to shatter everyone it touches. Influence of shame and social stigma. There is a silent verdict rendered against the families of killers. Communities whisper, friends withdraw, invitations vanish. It is as if guilt radiates outward by association. Sociologists call this courtesy stigma, the taint that spills from offender to kin. The Watts felt that gaze. Reporters parked outside. Strangers sent letters dripping with rage. Some messages accused them of raising a monster, others of enabling murder. In such an environment, shame becomes constant background noise. Every trip to the grocery store risks a stare that says murderer's mother. To cope, parents sometimes retreat or lash out. Defending the child becomes a counter-narrative against the chorus of condemnation. If the world insists you are complicit, you push back by asserting his humanity. This does not erase culpability, but it reclaims a fragment of dignity. Shame is suffocating. Defense is a gasp for air. Why some parents attack the victims instead. Victim blaming is painful to witness, yet it surfaces in case after case. The logic is twisted but clear. If the victim shared fault, the crime feels less monstrous and the child feels less lost. For Cindy, suggestions that Shanann was controlling or difficult function as psychological padding against the jagged edge of reality. This is not a reasoned legal stance. It is an emotional reflex. Shifting scrutiny to the victim dulls the accusation hanging over the family. It is a way of saying my son is flawed, but not irredeemable. From the outside, such comments wound surviving relatives and inflame public anger. Inside the parent's mind, they are desperate attempts to survive unbearable grief. Understanding the motive behind victim blaming does not excuse it. It highlights the profound dissonance between private coping and public expectation. Society demands solidarity with victims. A grieving parent's psyche demands relief from pain. Those needs collide, leaving statements that spark outrage and deepen the isolation already suffocating the family. Comparing the Watts case to serial killer parents. History shows a repeating pattern. Parents of infamous killers often sound strikingly similar. Ted Bundy's mother defended his character long after juries pronounced guilt. Jeffrey Dahmer's father wrestled publicly with grief and responsibility, writing a book to make sense of the nightmare. Dylan Klebold's mother spoke about loving her son while grieving his victims at Columbine. This does not make the Watts family unique. It places them inside a lineage of parents who stumble through the same impossible terrain. Society looks for neat morality plays. The reality is complicated humanity. These parents did not plan murders, yet they face suspicion and disdain. Comparisons reveal cultural tension. We applaud unconditional love when it rescues children from addiction or stands by them in illness. We condemn it when crimes are unthinkable. The Watts case simply amplifies that contradiction under a global spotlight. Observing the parallels does not normalize violence. It shows how primal bonds persist even in the shadow of horror. Coping through narratives of "he was misled." When reality threatens identity, the mind spins stories to soften the blow. One common narrative is that the offender was misled, pressured, or tricked. Parents imagine outside forces pulling invisible strings. It restores a sense of order. Cindy often hinted that Shanann's strong personality overwhelmed Chris. She questioned whether emotional strain or manipulation played a role. To the world, those remarks sound like shifting blame. Internally, they serve as scaffolding to keep grief from collapsing into hopelessness. This coping narrative buys time. It gives parents a storyline they can live with until they gather strength for deeper acceptance. It does not require that they believe every word forever. It simply makes sunrise possible the next morning. For some families, that narrative endures for life, because abandoning it would reopen wounds never truly healed. Religion and forgiveness in parental defense. Faith traditions teach that forgiveness is not earned but extended. For parents of violent offenders, that teaching can become lifeline. Prayer reframes horror, reminding them that no one is beyond redemption. Church communities offer shelter from gossip and judgment. Cindy and Ronnie found comfort in passages about grace. Believing that Chris might find spiritual peace allowed them to imagine a future that was not only concrete and bars. Religious framing transforms narrative from tragedy alone to tragedy within a larger plan. It does not remove pain, but it assigns purpose to survival. Critics sometimes scoff at such faith, interpreting it as naivety. Yet studies show spirituality often stabilizes grief responses. Forgiveness becomes less about excusing and more about releasing corrosive anger. For these parents, holding on to hope feels holier than abandoning the child entirely, whether the world agrees or not. Faith offers an anchor in a sea of condemnation. Fear of total loss denial as self-preservation. The Watts did not just lose grandchildren and a daughter-in-law. They risked losing their son as well. Accepting the full weight of his guilt would mean family annihilation from every angle. Some part of their minds refuse that finality. Denial becomes a way to keep one door ajar. This fear of total loss is primal. Humans are wired to maintain kinship ties. Cutting off a child is tantamount to cutting off a limb. By softening the narrative, parents keep one member alive in their emotional home, even if society has locked them away. Such denial does not erase knowledge. Deep down, parents may know the truth, but on the surface, they nurture fragments that still feel like love. This is not a rational calculation. It is survival instinct, a way of staying human when history demands surrender. How parents normalize behavior to cope. Normalization is the mind's quiet negotiation with trauma. Parents tell themselves the crime was an aberration, a break in character, something caused by stress or illness. By wrapping the act in context, they protect memory from complete collapse. Cindy and Ronnie repeated that Chris had always been a good boy, that something must have snapped. Listeners hear excuse. Parents hear balance. They are constructing a timeline in which the beloved child existed alongside the criminal. That narrative lets them keep photo albums open without flinching. Normalization is dangerous if it excuses future harm, but in the aftermath of irreversible tragedy, it can be a necessary sedative. It allows parents to speak, to visit, to keep breathing. Outside observers may recoil, yet inside the family, this narrative acts like emotional insulation against unbearable cold. The thin line between love and blindness. Parental love is instinctive and ferocious. It compels sleepless nights for a feverish child. It fuels sacrifices invisible to outsiders. That same force can turn into a blindfold when a child becomes a source of suffering. Cindy and Ronnie's love for Chris did not evaporate when he was accused. It reshaped itself, grasping for any thread of innocence left. Love becomes blindness when the need to protect eclipses the courage to confront. This does not mean parents condone evil. It means their hearts resist the story that everything cherished was a lie. That line between love and blindness wavers with every letter, every prison visit, every photograph from birthdays long past. Viewers often forget that parental memory is not evidence. It is an emotional archive. In that archive, Chris is still the boy learning to ride a bike, not the man in handcuffs. The human mind clings to that image as if letting go would mean erasing decades of love. Case study mothers who defended their killer sons. History offers sobering parallels. The mother of serial killer Edmund Kemper maintained a complicated relationship with her son even after he confessed. Jeffrey Dahmer's mother insisted for years that he was misunderstood, struggling to reconcile the boy she nurtured with the man the courts described. Dylan Klebold's mother Sue in the wake of Columbine, devoted herself to understanding how her gentle child became a school shooter. These mothers are not caricatures of denial. They are women facing an existential crisis. The child they bore has committed the unimaginable. Their defenses are not born of ignorance, but of an aching desire to salvage meaning from shattered identity. By examining their responses, we see that the Watts situation is less anomaly and more tragic repetition. Society judges harshly, but grief rarely follows a script. Maternal defense is often a coping language, spoken fluently by hearts that cannot abandon blood. Case study fathers who defended their killer sons. Fathers wrestled differently. Lionel Dahmer, an analytical man, sought scientific answers for Jeffrey's compulsions, hoping explanation might blunt despair. Randy Kraft's father described his son as good at heart, even as evidence mounted of serial murders. These men looked for pattern, pathology, anything that would let them tell themselves they were not blind to warning signs. Ronnie Watts mirrors this posture. He listens, asks, tries to decode his son's words for hidden truths. It is less fiery defense and more desperate inquiry. Fathers often feel duty-bound to fix things. When repair is impossible, they cling to the only salvageable part, the relationship itself. Visits, phone calls, birthday card become ritualized proof that love survives verdicts. Observing these fathers, one sees not a moral collapse, but the raw human instinct to keep standing beside their child on the coldest shoreline imaginable. Society's judgment of defending parents. Public opinion is swift and binary. When a parent voices doubt about a convicted child's guilt, outrage follows. Comment sections fill with condemnation. How can they defend a murderer? What many miss is that society demands parents grieve perfectly, silently, in alignment with courtroom facts, stripped of all nuance. The Watts family felt this pressure acutely. Each statement, however cautious, was dissected online. Support for Chris was interpreted as betrayal of Shanann and the girls. Yet from a human perspective, silence feels like abandonment, and abandonment feels unbearable. The very world that urges parents to love unconditionally can pivot overnight, declaring that same love unacceptable. Understanding this tension invites empathy without excusing harm. Judgment is easy when the tragedy belongs to someone else. Living inside it is chaos. Society seeks closure. Parents seek survival. The two rarely arrive on the same timetable. Psychological cost defending versus accepting. Defending a guilty child extracts a silent toll. Every headline reopens wounds. Every prison visit demands mental gymnastics. To defend is to risk ridicule, yet to accept is to drown in shame. Parents often oscillate between the two, never fully settling. For Cindy and Ronnie, public interviews reveal that strain. Their eyes carry exhaustion. Voices tremble under the weight of competing truths. Accepting Chris's full culpability would shatter their narrative of family. Defending invites perpetual scrutiny. Neither path offers peace. Psychologists note that chronic cognitive dissonance can lead to insomnia, anxiety, even health decline. The mind lives in two worlds, one of remembered love, one of documented violence. Balancing those worlds is not heroism. It is endurance. The cost is measured in quiet tears, sleepless nights, and the absence of uncomplicated joy. Viewers see fragments on television. The deeper suffering unfolds far from cameras, in living rooms haunted by photographs of happier times. Parental grief compounded by shame. Grief is heavy, but grief compounded by shame is nearly unbearable. Cindy and Ronnie Watts experienced not only the loss of their grandchildren and daughter-in-law, but also the collapse of their social identity. Friends avoided them, neighbors whispered, and the media scrutinized every expression. Shame magnifies sorrow, transforming mourning into an almost public performance. Every action becomes potential headline. Every word a misstep. The parents' grief was layered. They were mourning deaths they could not prevent while simultaneously defending themselves against moral condemnation. That dual burden deepens isolation. The world may not fully see it, but for parents like the Watts, grief and shame intertwine like vines, making each day a struggle to breathe and exist under judgment. The role of cognitive dissonance in defenses. Cognitive dissonance is a tension experienced when beliefs clash with reality. Parents hold two incompatible truths. My child is good, and my child committed horrific acts. The discomfort is profound. To reduce it, the mind adjusts perception, reinterprets facts, and sometimes targets blame elsewhere. Cindy's statements about Shanann illustrate this phenomenon. By attributing influence or control to external factors, she softened the contradiction. It is not about excusing murder. It is a psychological mechanism to maintain sanity. Cognitive dissonance allows parents to navigate unbearable truths without complete collapse. It explains why, to outsiders, words can appear contradictory. Behind the lines, the human mind is working tirelessly to reconcile love with horror, history with reality. Did defending Chris hurt or help them? Defending Chris brought temporary solace, but also consequences. Public perception worsened, backlash intensified, and Shanann's family felt alienated. Yet, internally, defense may have functioned as a lifeline. It allowed the Watts to continue interacting with Chris without entirely disintegrating emotionally. The measure of help or harm depends on perspective. From the public viewpoint, defending a murderer seems wrong. From a psychological perspective, it was survival. Parents often prioritize internal endurance over external approval. The defense may not have healed the family, but it allowed them to maintain a semblance of identity and emotional continuity amidst catastrophic trauma. Generational differences in parental reactions. Generational context influences responses to tragedy. Older parents often view family loyalty as sacred and unwavering. Younger parents, shaped by modern therapy culture, may emphasize accountability and emotional honesty. The Watts came from a more traditional background, where family bonds were paramount and public shame to be managed quietly. This framework shaped their reactions. It helps explain why they leaned on defense over immediate public condemnation. Understanding generational influence allows viewers to see their decisions not simply as moral failure, but as deeply human reactions informed by upbringing, culture, and life experience. Lessons from psychology on unconditional love. Unconditional love is a double-edged sword. It can heal, but it can also blind. Parents who love fiercely may simultaneously protect and distort reality. Psychological studies show that this form of love encourages empathy, but can complicate moral judgment when confronted with wrongdoing. For the Watts, unconditional love manifested as protective narratives, selective memory, and cautious defense. The world may view these behaviors as denial, yet within the family, they were survival strategies. Lessons from psychology reveal that unconditional love is neither purely virtuous nor wholly dangerous. It is profoundly human. It binds parents to children across joy, pain, and even unimaginable tragedy. Understanding this helps viewers see the Watts not as code enablers, but as humans navigating impossible terrain. Breaking points when parents stop defending. Even the strongest bonds have limits. Some parents eventually reach a breaking point where the weight of evidence, public scrutiny, or private reflection becomes too much to bear. At that moment, defense can shift into reluctant acceptance. The Watts breaking point has not been fully public. Yet in families facing extreme crimes, the pattern is familiar. Parents may continue to love their child while acknowledging guilt, separating the emotional bond from the behavioral reality. Breaking points are rarely dramatic. They are quiet, internal reckonings that reshape family dynamics. This stage marks both an ending and a survival tactic, allowing parents to maintain life and health while facing previously unbearable truths. Closing reflection: is defending ever justified? Is it wrong for parents to defend a murderer? The question cannot be answered with simple morality. It exists in a gray zone between instinct and ethics, human emotion and societal expectation. Defending a child may appear cruel to outsiders, yet psychologically it is often necessary for survival. It is an attempt to preserve identity, memory, and connection in the aftermath of chaos. The Watts case exemplifies this struggle. It shows that love persists even when logic demands severance. Whether justified or not, parental defense is a window into the human mind confronted with horror, grief, and unconditional attachment. Final words: a human dilemma. Family annihilation ripples outward. Ronnie and Cindy Watts were not accomplices, yet they became collateral in their son's crimes. Their defense of Chris angered the world, but also revealed the complexity of human emotion under extreme circumstances. When faced with incomprehensible tragedy, parents cling to what remains: love, memory, and connection, even if that attachment obscures judgment. The Watts story challenges us to examine instinct, morality, and empathy. It asks viewers to consider the painful paradox that is universal in parenthood: the desire to protect, the capacity for forgiveness, and the enduring power of love, even in the face of unspeakable acts. This is not a story of absolution. It is a story of survival, of human complexity, and of the fragile line between judgment and understanding. In understanding the parents, we are invited to reflect on ourselves, our families, and the boundaries of love in the shadow of unimaginable loss. If you found this deep dive into human psychology and true crime compelling, subscribe to Dark Truth, true crime stories, for more stories that explore the darkest corners of human behavior and the lessons they leave behind. Share your thoughts in the comments. How do you reconcile love and judgment in situations like this?